AJ, Marilyn, Victoria's who are missing, so we'll give her just a couple minutes.
Wait, y'all in school?
Yeah, teachers are.
Oh, oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, students are out for another week, but we're back. We're just keeping distant from each other. And I mean, we kind of needed to be here a little bit because they redid the floors over break and they moved all of our furniture around and stuff. So we all had some things to do. Plus, it just helps sort of keep us accountable for doing what we need to be doing. And also, speaking of that, um, I have definitely like been slow on grading stuff that was due like right at the beginning of break because I just like needed a break and I put my computer aside for 2 weeks and didn't look at it, which was good for my mental health. But on the other hand, it means I have a lot of stuff to grade now. However, I've made a lot of headway today, so you may have noticed your grades going up or down. The only I think I only have one thing left to grade for you guys. I mean, I'm gonna go in the Moby Dick multiple choice is not a grade, but I am gonna go in and check your answers, let you know how many you got wrong and right. But I just have the 2015 argumentative essay that we did on Friday. Considering today's Monday, I feel pretty good about that. Um, and then a couple more essays for other classes, but that's not your concern. Done a lot of grading today. I'm exhausted. But that being said, I should have those graded tomorrow, Wednesday at the latest. So you'll be kind of caught up on things by that point. And your grades will be accurate. Okay, so what I wanted to do today, actually, since we wrote those essays the other day, um, about using polite speech in conversation, like what the purpose of that is. I actually wanted to go back and look at essays that students wrote for it. Oh, I mean, I'm going to stick with my plan for today, but it would be really, I think it might be good at some point if I assign you guys an essay to write and then show you what students have in this class, students from Allegro, without using their names, of course, how they've done on these essays. So I might can even go back and find their grades in the commentary I made, possibly. So that would be kind of fun. Fun's not the right word. Helpful, useful might be a better word. But just to see how some of your sort of peers have fared on these. But for today, what we're going to do is look at the sample essays that they provide us, just to kind of remind you guys. Um, let's see, I'm on the wrong assignment right now. Yeah, here we go. The question, you'll probably remember it, but just to kind of refresh you, they gave the little thing about the study. An anthropologist studying first year students at a university in the US writes that friendly phrases like "how are you," "nice to meet you," and "let's get in touch" communicate politeness rather than literal intent. What, if anything, is the value or function of such polite speech? In a well written essay, develop your position on the value or function of polite speech in a culture or community with which you are familiar. Use appropriate evidence for your reading, experience, or observations to support your argument. Um, and I've started reading these, but have not gotten very far on them yet. So I don't yet know how you guys did, but let's. I kind of want to go through these essays, and like we've seen in the past, the first one we'll look at scored very highly. The second one was kind of in the middle, and the last one scored on the lower end. And I've reiterated this a few times, but now we work on a scale for essays. We work on a scale from 1 to 6. In all previous years before last year, it was a scale of 1 to 9. So just kind of keep in mind that, like, if I tell you the score of these, it's a little bit different than what it would be scored on the scale that we use now. I posted these on Canvas, but I'm also just going to share my screen with you. So it might be a little bit easier. Okay, so these are from this from this question, and they just, all of this is just kind of like reiterating the grading scale that they use. And I think the ones we're going to look at today is the first one is an 8, so it's effective, doesn't blow you away as much as a 9 would, but does a really solid job. 5 is I remember when I was trained for like to teach AP and we were going over scores, they were like, 5 is just barely adequate because a 4 is inadequate. So you know, they answer the question, they develop the position, but not well. And then the other one we're going to look at is a 3. So it's not adequate, but it's also like demonstrates even less success than a 4 would at developing a position and developing an argument, and might have less maturity in the control of their writing. So probably because you guys don't like to volunteer, I'll end up reading all 3, but I'll definitely read this first one because I recognize that this handwriting is not incredible. So as we go, just kind of pay attention to what's going on here, like what the person who wrote it is accomplishing, how they're accomplishing it, what's good about it, what's not great about it, what's successful and what's not. Being polite is considered an unspoken edict in order to be accepted in our first world culture that relies on societal niceties in order to function. These part of such a community use polite speech to faintly imply intent. But as the anthropologist concluded, this is hard to read, but as the anthropologist concluded, these phrases are used to communicate politeness rather than the literal meaning of the sentences. This is because although these are unnecessary in accomplishing whatever one sets out to do directly, they are the trappings that make others more receptive to one's own purpose, whether they are superiors, juries, or even the general public. Polite speech is what enables those who use it to obtain what they want in a society free from the pressures other than simple desire to do something. Polite speech lends respectability to proceedings. Okay. I feel like their thesis might not be like super formulaic, but it does what it needs to do. So, for example, polite speech is an expectation in an environment like school. Okay, so using their own knowledge as an example, that's good. This person has clearly been to school, so they would know. It is a tacit rule to speak as such when students address teachers or other administrators, and probable that without its implementation, students' words and by extension, requests or queries would be disregarded. Polite speech conveys not only a serious intent, but also ensures a subservience that students must display to assure their superiors that they are the ones in control. It's used thus when titles like ma'am must be used as addresses to imply mastery, and when phrases like please and may I are thrown in to lend an impression of supplication to simple requests. Human nature to assert power over those who ought to follow until they are capable of fulfilling their roles in a community has resulted in polite speech being the indication that respect must be conferred to those higher up in order for one to be taken seriously. A common platform for polite speech is also when important personages such as politicians connect conduct ceremonies, and must make celebratory addresses. These people know that their words will be broadcast to the general population. Since their continued influence relies on the goodwill of the people, polite speech is used in order to give the impression that their words are official and justified. It separates them from the lower population who use colloquialisms in their informal speech and places these people as higher up on the ladder of authority to impress upon their subordinates that they ought to be followed. Throughout history, formal language has been associated with those in power, and thus those in power continue to use it as the way to signify that they possess the capability to retain that power and are fit for the position to lead. Being polite shows that they don't need to resort to baser tendencies to accomplish goals and provides a veneer of respectability to their affairs. Lastly, excuse me. Lastly, polite speech makes frequent appearances in the language of those working in service to the law, such as judges, lawyers, clerks, court officers, and their officials present during legal proceedings. As with the example mentioned previously, polite speech adds a sense of elevated responsibility to proceedings. In venues where legal cases are being tried, polite speech also is utilized to make it seem as though the decisions are right and completely justified. Because politeness is associated with propriety and thus ethical something. I don't know. When it is used in official decisions, it gives those affected, such as juries, accused, and witnesses, the closure that the ruling was fair and just. It's meant to be confirmation. Could be that. Correctness was that word. Ethical correctness. Sorry, I just lost my spot. The closure that the ruling was fair and just. It's meant to be confirmation for those listening that it's likely unquestionable that justice was served. This, once again, is a product of the human need to be supported in their decisions. Human nature can be subject to doubt in all cases, but the polite speech used is able to confer a sense of resolution so that some people feel secure about the rulings. After all, if they sound so correct, I don't know, rationalization is that it is similarly correct in meaning. Therefore, it can be seen that although polite speech, like regular communication, may display intent, instead it in fact is used to relate politeness to the receiver. This connotes subservience, respectability, and ethical rightness to the audience for it, and so functions as a method to persuade those receiving the words to the side of the speaker. The usage of polite speech preys on human susceptibility to ethos and pathos in order to influence them to trust and support the speaker, and therefore it's evident that polite speech is much more than empty words. Okay, I think this was really good, actually. I might have given it a 9 out of 9. First thing is that this person's writing is very sophisticated. They know a lot of words, but it never sounds like they're showing off. It just sounds like they're using all the words they know appropriately. So I think that's really helpful in kind of elevating it to that next level. It's also organized. They have 3 body paragraphs, and each one talks about a different scenario in which polite speech is going to be used and what the effect of that polite speech is, why it's used, why it works in that scenario. So it really answers the question. It really does a good job of developing the position. I'm actually going to skip down to the bottom because there's commentary about all of these. And it'll be helpful to see what the AP readers actually have to say about it. So it says that this essay effectively argues that polite speech is much more than empty words, uses 3 well-developed examples, convincingly demonstrates that polite speech in schools, official ceremonies, and the legal system communicates more than the literal meaning of the sentences. This is actually it's an interesting take because I feel like a lot of times when I read these essays for this prompt, the general feeling is that polite speech is used to avoid hurting people's feelings or being rude. And this person offers an option for why it's a positive thing in the first place. So that's kind of cool. Their claims are supported by appropriate evidence and explanations, demonstrates that in official context, formal language has been associated with those in power. It's especially coherent, its arguments well developed, and its prose demonstrates a consistent ability to control a wide range of the elements of effective writing. So it doesn't really say why it scored an 8 instead of a 9, but like it didn't say anything bad about it. So it's also really, really hard to score a 9. I've only ever seen a few. Okay, oops. I just need to skip back up here. Let's take a look at the second one. You guys might want me to read all these anyway, just because none of the handwriting's very good on these. This is like sort of similar handwriting. Before we do, did you guys pick up on anything else that you're like, oh, that's good? That's one of the reasons that it probably got an 8. Those are things that I would try to like imitate if I were writing it.
Plus, the vocabulary seems good.
For sure. The vocabulary was really good. I think I've mentioned this before. AP is the only class where I've ever had students ask me to give them more vocabulary, because when they read a really good essay like this, they're like, oh, that person knows a lot more words than I do. And you want to be able to like show off that vocabulary too, which I get. And we'll do some more vocabulary, but probably not until after we're finished with In Cold Blood. Anything else that you guys noticed about that one?
They're like the sentences, like the way they form their sentences are good as well.
Yeah, I think that kind of all plays into like just sophisticated writing. Like they just are, this person is clearly like really skilled at getting across their ideas in an effective way. They use good vocabulary, they could use good sentence structure, they keep it interesting to read. Oh, hang on, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for just a second because I just got an email from frickin' Mr. Nykirk. I don't know why I call him frickin' Mr. Nykirk. It's fine that he emailed. We're supposed to have a staff meeting and now we're not. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I'll share again. Okay, so this one received a 5. So keep in mind, it's like just barely passable. Like it's right on that line, but it's on the positive side of the line. So there are definitely going to be things that this person could improve on, but they're going to do some things well too. This is going to be really hard to read. I apologize. I feel like I'm a much like, huh?
Why is the handwriting so bad?
It's so bad. And I mean, I'm sure, I feel like students' handwriting in general is worse these days, probably because we type everything and you don't have to like work on your handwriting. But I feel like I am a much slower reader when the handwriting is bad, because I'm like, what does this say? But I'll try my best. And this one is 4 pages, good Lord. In society, there are certain standards that one expects to be met. It is expected that when meeting new people or old friends, you communicate through age-old phrases. It is not required necessarily, it is just the norm that is expected. But what function does typical everyday politeness serve? Why do we never come up with new phrases? In my experience as an employee to a local yogurt shop, I find myself obligated to inquire how my customers are feeling. It may not be something more. It may not be much more than socially expected, but a polite "how are you" can be more than a polite phrase. I know from experience that when asked "how are you," one has a sense of being cared for. The speaker may not mean anything by the phrase aside from standard, but knowing that someone cares enough to inquire after their well-being is a pickup. Sometimes I fail in tasking this. But when I do, the customers, especially the older generation, seem genuinely surprised. Politeness seems to be a thing of the past, but when one is polite on principle, the mood of a room can change with one simple phrase. I think that's the end of that paragraph. In which case, maybe this is supposed to be the intro where it says we never come up with new phrases. And this is supposed to be a new paragraph. Kind of hard to tell though, since they don't indent. Another function of polite, even colloquial phrases is to show the world that one is not a stuck-up, arrogant human with no, no something for the well-being of others. As a teenager in today's society, it's hard to break the social stereotypes placed on us. Media and social networking have made my generation an egotistical, self-helping, arrogant generation with no respect for themselves, thank God, themselves, peers, or elders. Politeness and chivalry are dying concepts, and with the media only encouraging their destruction, it's different for teenagers to stand out from the stereotype. Polite speech is also a showing of respect. When asking someone how their day is going, one is saying that whether they want to or not, they care about the other person's well-being. Whether they want to or not, they care about. Interesting. Most of the time, people respond with the expected, "I'm doing well, how are you?" But sometimes the question may elicit a conversation that was the something to bloom into the beginnings of a new friendship. Politeness is expected and rudeness is socially unacceptable. There are things one is supposed to say and things they are not supposed to say. And then there are things that people say that go beyond social expectation. Inquiring after a person's well-being is a kind gesture, but offering a compliment is far more appreciated. I once offered a young woman a compliment on her appearance, and she smiled boldly, and told me I had just made her day. Good Lord. Whew. People expect the normal expected phrases. Sure they do. But when one goes beyond the expectation, great things happen. Polite speech serves a purpose, and we can take that at the bare minimum. But when we go the distance and are kind as well as polite, we present ourselves in a newer, friendlier light. Don't fit the typical mold. Go beyond expectation and offer a little more of yourself. Sometimes you get a response, other times you don't, but not spending? Not something on the response, you will leave the situation feeling a better person. Whew, that was tough to get through. Not because it's horrible, but because the handwriting's so horrible. And there are genuinely a couple words I could not detect. So my first impression is that it doesn't need to be as long as it is, and I think would benefit from some editing. I think I've said this before, that there's not a direct correlation between the length and how well you do, but typically speaking, a longer essay is going to score better because it's more developed. Your argument is going to be developed more. The whole thing's just going to be more fleshed out. And if you have a really short essay, you haven't left yourself room to develop your argument. But that's not always the case, as evidenced by this sample essay, because it didn't score all that well. It scored a 5 out of 9. And I think one of the reasons is because they kind of went on a good bit about something. Like their ideas were not bad, but they could have been condensed. They could have been a little bit more concise. Why do you think that this one, what are some reasons you guys think that this one maybe didn't do as well as the first one we looked at?
The handwriting.
Well, handwriting doesn't actually matter. And I'm not saying just have a free for all, but stuff like handwriting and even bad spelling, they don't take off for those things. In fact, you could even, I always recommend like writing your intro last so it definitely matches what you're saying. Or that's a thing that I like to do. And if you did that, you could actually write it last and then draw an arrow up to where it's supposed to be. And it would be okay, because you should treat these as like a rough draft, which is why I don't grade them as harshly as I would an essay that you had like a week or more to write. Because when you've only got 45, 50 minutes, there's only so much you can do, and we all recognize that. So the handwriting isn't going to take away from their score. It's going to make it harder to read, obviously, but it's not actually going to take away this from the score. So what are some things that this writer did that possibly contributed, did or did not do, that possibly contributed to having a lower score?
The vocabulary in this one wasn't as good as the vocabulary in the other one we read.
Yeah, you're right. It's just less sophisticated writing overall. Um
And it seems kind of like sloppy. Not like some pieces don't fit well.
yeah. I would agree with that. Like kind of disjointed, disorganized, like it doesn't, I hate to say the word flow, but it doesn't flow well. Um there were definitely times where as I was reading I was thinking, "Oh, I might would have moved this like earlier in the essay or later in the essay." Um we've talked about how you want to try to maintain like that scholarly tone, which usually involves not using first person pronouns like I. But the exception to that would be if you have a personal anecdote that would really support your argument. And sometimes, especially with argumentative essays, you will have those. And so this person used one towards the beginning, excuse me, while they were talking about working at the yogurt shop. But honestly, I feel like this would have been stronger if they had opened with that. Um, like talking about how in the yogurt shop, they're expected to ask people how they are, but you don't necessarily expect someone to give more than just the like standard, "I'm fine, how are you?" And use that to kind of hook the reader and then lead into the thesis. Which I'm not sure that we have a thesis. Um, as I'm looking, it is very hard to determine where this person intended to break up their paragraphs, if at all, because they did indent in the beginning, but then they never indented again. And I can kind of see that like they ended some lines early, so maybe this is supposed to be a new paragraph. Um, but they're kind of just restating the question rather than trying to answer it in the intro. Um, like, but what function does typical everyday politeness serve? Why do we never come up with new phrases? That's kind of tough. They don't really have one. Let's see what the AP people think. I'm actually looking forward to reading this one that looks like it was written by a 9-year-old. It develops the position that polite speech can create a pleasant social mood, indicate to others that one's not a stuck-up, arrogant human with no emotion for the well-being of others, and be a way to show respect. The evidence and explanations are limited, so that's like their big main thing. For example, to support the claim that polite speech shows respect, the essay simply repeats an earlier point made to show that polite speech creates a nice atmosphere. And that's kind of one of those examples I was thinking of where it could be shortened. Like, let's not repeat the exact same stuff we've already said. Let's provide new evidence and a new way of looking at stuff. How polite speech functions to demonstrate respect is not explained or developed. It develops its position unevenly, which I think is kind of what you were aiming at, AJ. Like it's kind of sloppy. It's not very well organized. Towards the end, the student launches into a discussion of how rudeness is socially unacceptable and of how going beyond the normal expected phrases can make great things happen. Those are sort of like, I almost felt like those were the polite speech, like the essay version of polite speech. Like, let's just throw something in there to sound good. But it didn't really focus on the prompt. It's able to advance a position in generally clear prose, but it's inconsistent, limited evidence and explanation. So not great. It's kind of funny that the word they use is limited when it was the longest one. But that just goes to show you can write a lot without saying very much. Okay. I'm excited about this one because number one, it looks easier to read, but also the beginning is gonna make me laugh. This is a 3, so it's not like the worst you could do, but again, it's not going to be very good. It's not going to take a very solid position. Let's see what else we think it's doing badly. I will say it starts with like a little anecdote, presumably. It starts with a hook that makes me want to keep reading. So that's a positive thing, but let's see what all kinds of negative things they do. I see a casual acquaintance down the hall. Hey, how are you? I ask. Bad. I'm startled. I expected the answer to be good. How are you? Instead, I'm thrown headfirst into a conversation of his bad day without being able. Where do we start? Topics from what I've been focusing on before. I don't know what this says, but my friend was impolite. I really don't mind listening to him talk about his day, but a little warning would have been nice. If I had said, how are you? And he had said, all right, I'm all right. How about you? Or been better, you? Well, then I can say that I'm fine and ask what's wrong. And now we've comfortably slipped into a conversation about a bad day. In short, these responses are more polite. In short, polite speech is intended to be just that, polite, nice, comfortable, and friendly. Okay. In the teenage world, many formalities are ignored. We don't dress fancy, we're not exactly quiet, and we're not too big on shaking hands with each other. But polite speech is something we hold on to. We say things like, nice to meet you, when we're introduced to someone our age by a friend. We should hang out one day is also a big one for my age group. Do we mean it? Not always. Why do we say it? Consider the other option. Person A, meet person B. Hi, person B, I didn't want to meet you. Well, they were honest. No, not honest. They were rude. Who cares if they didn't want to meet person B? Who cares if person B looks like a jerk and kind of smells bad? Person A ruined that whole exchange, not to mention they embarrassed person C who introduced them. Long story short, now they're all pretty uncomfortable. No coming back from that one. These polite terms are probably evolutions of older greetings and goodbyes. When people said good day, was it always a good day? Probably not. When saying charmed after meeting someone, were people always charmed? I'm going to assume not. Our language has evolved to the point where what's up can replace hello and it was good to see you can replace goodbye. Rejecting them rejects our current social constructions. Honestly, some of our modern constructions should be rejected. They're outdated and bigoted, but these polite phrases shouldn't. They serve only to foster kindness. Today, there's suffering, pain, crisis, despair, and many other horrible things that people go through every day. If we can soften that with have a good day, why wouldn't we? Okay. I will say, I think that one was like the most, it was like the easiest to read, but there might be some not great reasons why that's true. Why do you guys think that this person didn't score very highly? Any ideas? All right, here's one I thought about. Yes, it was easy to read. Their handwriting makes me so angry. It's very like I feel like a child wrote it. and I would put money that it was a male student, not because it's bad, but because the handwriting is just more like girls tend to have like curvier letters and guys tend to have spikier letters. That's not a hard and fast rule, but a lot of times it is, and that's what I just really feel like this is probably a male student. Um, I said that it was easier to read than the others, and I think that it was, but one reason for that is because the whole thing is like sort of a narrative. Like he's using all these different scenarios that he's created, like person A meets person B, or like I ran into a friend and asked him how he was. We're definitely not maintaining the scholarly tone. The whole thing is kind of in first person, not necessarily just using first person like as an anecdote or as a hook. I don't hate that they started that way, but at some point you need to kind of dial that back and adopt a more professional, academic, scholarly tone. I'm not sure he answered the question exactly, at least not until the end, where he said that some of our modern constructions serve only to foster kindness. Like that would answer the question of what's the purpose of polite speech. The other things that I noticed, and feel free to jump in if any of you guys thought of something. I'm not sure where the intro ends. Maybe here. There's like some weird spacing and indentation up here, so it's sort of like just up until bad is the intro, but I think the whole thing kind of is. In which case, I think that their thesis would be, in short, polite speech is intended to be just that, polite, nice, comfortable, and friendly.
Why is there so many scribbles?
So many scribbles.
Making
Yeah,
me
I guess
angry.
which like it's okay to do stuff like that, but I will say if you choose to scribble stuff out, make sure you clarify like what the person is supposed to be reading, because I had that issue right here. Um, like I can't quite tell what that's supposed to be on the side there, but it doesn't make sense to just say into a conversation of his bad day without being able topics from what I've been focusing on before. So I'm not sure what he's intending to do there. So again, fine if you scribble stuff out, but make sure that you're clear about what the person is supposed to be reading. Because you do use a pen, not a pencil on this part. Or actually, I don't know how, I don't quite know yet how it's going to work. I assume that because they've done other, like they've done map testing and stuff in person, that they will also do the AP test in person. We did it online for the first time ever last year, and I think it was not great. Just the format and like it wasn't great. It wasn't the best way to do it. So I'm hoping it's in person again. I think it's actually like more beneficial to you if it's in person, and less complicated if it's in person. There was definitely some stuff going on with trying to do it online that like Mike Baum and I were both tearing our hair out about like a whole day and a half beforehand. So it was really stressful. Not very sophisticated. I think we can say that pretty confidently. There's no like impressive words, and like you don't have to throw impressive words in all the time, and you don't have to try to sound fancy if that's not the way that you'd really say it. But again, it has to do with that scholarly tone. This is very conversational, and that's not really the tone that you want to take with an essay like that. So let's see what the AP folks say about this person. Scored a 3. It inadequately develops its position that polite speech creates politeness and fosters kindness. Yeah, I would agree with that, because to say that polite speech creates politeness is sort of redundant. Those explanations are consistently insufficient. It begins by imagining this scenario where like the casual acquaintance is impolite. He answers the question, how are you, by saying that he's bad. This explanation is unconvincing and leads to a circular assertion. Polite speech is intended to be just that, polite. When I said it was redundant, that's what he means by circular assertion. Polite speech is intended to be polite. Like, yeah. Then there's this other hypothetical question where the person says, I didn't want to meet you. And it's true that such a blunt response would ruin that whole exchange and embarrass the person who introduced them. But that's a pretty simplistic analysis of the value or true function of polite speech. It neglects to develop or support its claim that polite speech fosters kindness. Maybe he could have kind of gone further with that. Although the prose generally conveys the student's ideas, it's an overly simple explanation, and limited development earned it a score of 3. So that's another pretty good example of a longer, it's not long, but it's a longer essay that doesn't really develop a position. It doesn't really go very far. It's about as long as the first one was, but the first one said a lot more. This one is really simplistic. It's just like, polite speech is intended to be polite. Here's an example of how that works. He also doesn't really answer the part of the question about like, how do you see this at work in your community? I mean, he did say the thing about teenagers, so I guess that answers it a little bit, about how like we should hang out sometime. We should hang out one day. That's also a big one for that age group. There's also a lot of like, do we mean it? Not always. Did this person really mean that? Probably not. Kind of like posing these rhetorical questions and then answering them, which goes against the point of a rhetorical question. Okay, so since we've looked at those, I kind of I wanted to look at those after you guys had already read, after you had already written your version of it. And I'll be interested to read y'all's responses to see like, how does it compare to these that we've looked at? Hopefully better than that last one. But one thing that all 3 of them definitely had in common, which is something that we've been kind of struggling with overall in this class, is just getting a full essay down. It's not always going to be perfect, but if you can get an introduction, a body, and at least a concluding sentence, if not a full conclusion, then you're going to have a lot better luck than if you turn in something that's incomplete. I think at some point, we did go over earlier in the year the little presentation about intros, thesis statements, and conclusions, but I might like pre-record a video at some point, just sort of reviewing that again, because as I was grading the student anxiety essays, I did notice people struggling with intros and conclusions, and sometimes thesis statements too. I've said before, I think conclusions are the hardest thing to write, because it's like, how do I lead out of this essay and say something that's worth reading without repeating exactly what I've already said? And that can be really tough. So I think I'm gonna kind of maybe next week, maybe week after next, do like a little review session of that. But I think that's it. Any final like thoughts or reflections as you're reading this, since you've already written the essay? Okay, well, in that case, wait one quick second. I just wanted to look at my lesson plan for the rest of the week. Yeah, just don't forget that you need to finish reading part 3 of In Cold Blood. We actually probably won't talk about it until Thursday. I said for you guys to be finished with it by Wednesday, but I think we won't talk about it until Thursday. So that's it, and I will see you guys tomorrow.